Good evening and welcome. It's my great pleasure this evening to be discussing a new opera, Dido's Ghost, alongside its creators, the composer Errollyn Wallen and librettist Wesley Stace, here with you this evening. Dido's Ghost premiered almost exactly 1 year ago on June 6, 2021 at the Barbican Centre and was commissioned by the Dunedin Consort Barbican Centre, Edinburgh International Festival, Buxton International Festival, Mahogany Opera and Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra and Chorale. The opera received performances at the Barbican, Buxton, and in Edinburgh. It was directed by Frederick Wake Walker and played by the Dunedin Concert led by John Butt. I feel particularly lucky to have two of the opera's creative team here with me this evening, and after briefly introducing them, we shall dive into an exploration of the work itself. The librettist of Dido's Ghost, Wesley Stace, was born in Hastings and read English literature as an undergraduate at Jesus College, Cambridge. Initially, he began undertaking a PhD in social and political sciences, but the creative arts and a talent for singer-songwriting called him away. You may be more familiar with him as John Wesley Harding and the many albums he's released under that name. Wes has also published a number of novels under his birth name, including Misfortune in 2004 and Charles Jessold, Considered as a Murderer, 2010. He recently co-wrote with Mark Morris the choreographer's memoir Out of Line, published in 2019. Wes currently lives in Philadelphia and is creator and host of Cabinet of Wonders, a monthly variety show at City Winery, New York City. Composer Errollyn Wallen was born in Belize but moved to Britain as a young girl. Her musical output has been prolific, writing music for stage, screen, cabaret, and concert hall in a wide variety of genres. Not that we should even necessarily think about Wallen's work generically. As the motto of her music group Ensemble X proudly states, we don't break down barriers in music, we don't see any. Notable works and commissions by Errollyn include her Concerto for Percussion and Orchestra for BBC Young Musician of the Year in 1994 and commissions for the BBC Proms. This Frame is Part of the Painting in 2019 and a reworking of Jerusalem in 2020. Errollyn also wrote two works, Principia and Spirit in Motion, for the opening of the London 2012 Paralympic Games. She has won numerous honours and prizes, such as the Ivor Novello Award for Classical Music in 2013, an MBE in the Queen's New Year's Honours List in 2007, and a CBE in 2020. Errollyn is an honorary fellow at Mansfield College, Oxford, and most recently became a visiting professor of composition at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. An achievement I know Errollyn is singularly proud of is that her music travelled to outer space on board a rocket ship with Canadian astronaut Steve McLean. A specific form of collaboration which has been central to Errollyn's musical trajectory has been opera. Since Four Figures with Harlequin received its premiere at Riverside Studios in London in 1994, Errollyn has written 22 operas. Their subject matter has been remarkably varied. Her cycle, Another America, weaved together historical events and fiction. The joyous and gruesomely fantastic children's opera, Cautionary Tales, was based on the poems of Hilaire Belloc. Errollyn has frequently been drawn to real-life subject matter in her operatic works. For example, her opera Anon, written to coincide with Welsh National Opera's performances of Manon, was based on the real-life experiences of 21st century sex workers in the UK. The Silent Twins, from 2007, staged the lives of two Black Welsh sisters, June and Jennifer Gibbons, who were incarcerated at Broadmoor for arson and who communicated verbally only with each other. The Powder Monkey, performed in 2019, tells of an uprising on a slave ship in 1788, and Errollyn's latest two operas, which unbelievably both premiered in the last month, The Paradise Files for Grey Eye Theatre and Quamino's Map for Chicago Opera Theatre, also took historical events as their subject matter. Tonight, however, we turn to mythical Carthage, Italy, and the underworld as we focus on Errollyn's engagement with Purcell and Virgil. So without further ado, let's now turn to Dido's Ghosts. Errollyn, would you describe Dido's Ghosts for those of us who haven't seen it? And then, Wes, would you perhaps take us through the opera's synopsis?
So, in essence, Dido's Ghost is well, in its very real sense, is the sequel to the story of Aeneas. It's what happens after Aeneas has left Carthage, and and the whole idea grew out of being asked to maybe to think of a companion piece that would sit alongside Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. But then this idea of sequel came about very much through Wes discovering writings. So I'll pass over to Wes.
Thank you, Errollyn. When Errollyn, had talked about this idea, because for a long time, Dido and Aeneas by Purcell is a short little thing, and so people try and pair it with something. I had been involved, and I'm never sure of the chronology, kind of writing a novel or a piece of fiction about Dido. And during that time, I came across a sequel to the famous Dido myth, which is in Ovid's Fasti, and in it, I found, and I therefore thought, well, why don't we do a sequel? But why don't we do it? And I don't know whose idea this bit was, but why don't we do it where I present the sequel, story of which I'm just going to tell you, and in the middle of it, we play Purcell's Dido and Aeneas as a memory, as a court performance, which causes psychological reactions in the people. And as we started writing it, the genius of Errollyn Wallen, and indeed the director Freddie Wake Walker, was to encourage me to have them more merge into each other's realities. So basically that's what the finished opera is, with Purcell mostly playing entire in the middle of it, but not quite. And the sequel is Aeneas is about to found Rome. He's living in Lavinium with his new wife, Lavinia, and upturns the girl from Dr. No in James Bond terms out of the water. And that is Dido's sister. But Aeneas only sees Dido. The whole love for Dido comes back to him, and he believes it is. It's then his sister. He takes her back to court to introduce her to his wife with great pomp and ceremony. And they receive her, but, the wife is jealous. The opera of Dido and Aeneas plays before them. They become the roles in that opera. And then the wife decides, with the help of a henchman, to do away with Anna, thus preserving Aeneas's focus on his destiny. And that has tragic outcomes, because Aeneas knows that he must save Anna, the sister, in order to right the wrong he did to Dido. And in a kind of apotheosis ending, Dido and Anna become one and become gods, and he dies, but he has saved them on some level. Is that right, Errollyn?
That's exactly right. And I must also say that what was wonderful about this creative team, everybody had an input, but there was such a eureka moment when you found Ovid.
Yes.
But I also remember John Butt, our conductor, was really keen that we merge things, and I think that decision has made for something which I think is genuinely original, and leads to the fact that the Purcell in the end starts at the very end. The Purcell is telling us the sequel. So we've everything's been.
Well, and also it's very lovely the way not only the new myth fuses with the sequel, also the music of Errollyn Wallen, which is more modern, obviously, fuses with the Purcell, and the Purcell finds echoes in the kind of memories in Errollyn Wallen's music too. So, and I have to say, it is quite a hard opera to synopsize briefly, but I think that's the best I've ever done it.
Best than I could ever do.
Well, I'm surprised. I didn't practice it, but that's it. That's what it is, and it all fuses together very nicely. And Aeneas has to relive the trauma of what he went through with Dido, and I would say on that level, it has many deep, tones in it, and the psychology, we didn't have to work very hard to make that very deep.
Yes.
For the people,
yeah,
for the singers.
So it's sort of there in the rich material from the beginning.
Yeah.
And talking about from the beginning, one of the things that I was struck about this merging of Wallen and Purcell is just in the musical tone. Errollyn, am I right in thinking that you open with harpsichord paired with marimba?
Yes, I had to think, looking at the Purcell, which is highly stylized, and I had to think of what instruments I might add, if any. And once I decided to add percussion, I'd recently been working, I'd written work actually with Kathy Marston, where I'd used something called a hand pan. So it sounds like a very mellow steel pan. And that, it opens with that sound. I do use the marimba as well, and I use quite light, I use percussion, and then I added electric bass as well. So I added these sonorities which occasionally also bleed into the Purcell, and it's a very good reason. The percussion was, I think I was thinking of North African percussion. There's a lot of hand stuff, but then of course I go completely off piece, and I used straightforward drum kit as well. But I can tell you that when I started, the libretti is one of the best librettis I've ever seen for any opera. It was utter gift to work with. But what was hard for me was, really sort of taking on the Purcell, this work which is considered the first important English opera, and so it stands there, right there in the canon of works. And I was thinking, how can I take it on? I'm not a musicologist, so I have to find another way in. And the more I worked with Purcell, the more I found links with my own music, and to do with the very raw sort of material of music, the intervals, but where I was thinking Purcell didn't have people weren't using percussion in the same way then. Mm-hmm. People couldn't use dissonance in the same way. They couldn't use really wild rhythms. So that is what I was able to add, a sensibility, and it's that I think helps us bring out the some really important emotions where Purcell can only go so far.
Great. So shall we let's watch a little excerpt of the opera. This comes from the beginning, when Aeneas, played here by Matthew Brooke, and Ascanius, David Lee, meet Dido / Anna, this mysterious figure on the shore. We're going to share a recording from the Barbican. Now, please bear with us. In this internet age, the quality of the sound and vision might be a little less than performance quality, but hopefully it will give you a good picture of the atmosphere of the piece. Tell us.
luxury and rest. Father, I will follow behind and look back in time. As we saw you, truly you see, the rivers and the flood. This is my kingdom. I offer you the comfort of loving you, of loving you. In the past, and it and your one-time queen. As if I drew you here. I know winds blow only where gods command.
Great. I hope that gave you some idea of the kind of musical texture and verbal texture. I wanted to just go back to this idea of adapting some of the ancient texts, Wes. You were tasked with weaving together Nahum Tate's libretto for Dido and Aeneas with a selection of ancient texts and some new material. The section we saw then really closely adapted the segment of Anna's journey after Carthage from Ovid's Fasti. Could you talk us a little bit through this process and some of the choices you made?
Well, verbally, just on the level of words alone, I just wanted to make it consonant with the original text without being in any way kind of, it's difficult to avoid being colloquial because you want to keep it on the tone. But on the other hand, the Purcell in the middle is being played as something that happened in the past. So it was okay to distinguish a little between antiquity, both Purcell and the mythical past, and what is a kind of, in Aeneas's mind, I think I thought of him a little bit like Tennyson's poem about, is it Ulysses? It's Ulysses, isn't it? And I thought of him a bit like that, like, I need something to do, you know, it's all done. It was all great in the mythical past, and now I'm dying in the present. So that was that, and I mean, you know, try and avoid cliches and don't mention iPod, and you know, in that way you'll be fine. But with the actual adapting of it, of the myth, I got really into that Ovid, and I got this book, which I just went to get off my shelf. It was an incredibly helpful book to me. And this is various historical approaches and explanations of the Dido myth. And so I read all the, you know, who Anna Perenna was, why there is a day in the Fasti that is her day. And every little bit you find, there's another one in someone called, is it Silius, or I can't remember the name now, another historian who tells a slightly different version. And I took all those versions and made what I thought was the purest way to do it. In one, she becomes the moon. In another one, she's slaughtered in the ditch. And, there's all kinds of things. And so I just tried to engage with all the little bits I read and make, for Errollyn, the most compelling story. And that story seemed to me that everybody had to relive the trauma of Dido and Aeneas, be it a now possessed by the god's wife, who is so possessed that she sees Anna as a threat and needs to kill her, and Aeneas needs to save her. But another book that was incredibly helpful to me, and I was reminded of it by that bit about the pale sandy shore, was this book by Berta Tilley that I think is quite a famous book called Virgil's Latium, which I was recommended. And that has photos of the actual places where, in the Aeneid, where the boat comes up and the black sails are. There's a picture of that rather disappointing piece of landscape and a picture of where, and that was incredibly helpful to me to actually see what the places look like, to see what Carthage might have looked like. There's all these internet sites now. So my process was to come up with the best story that would fit around it. That was also totally true to the sources. There's very little I invented myself, if you know what I mean, except in as much as I wove it together. I might be being a little bit modest there, but anyway, that's fine.
I want to just now turn to the issue of readapting and coming to the classical antiquities. So I wanted to ask you both why you think that, why this ancient material has relevance to you, why it resonates. And am I right in thinking that you both studied material from classical antiquity at school? And in particular, Errollyn, how does this relate to you learning Latin as a young developing mind at school away?
I went to the school and I was 13 when I went to that school. So I was told, okay, everybody else has been learning Latin for a year. So here's Kennedy's Latin primer. Go and teach yourself that and join us next year. So my grammar was always terrible, but also in the Latin, it was Caesar's Gallic Wars for ages and ages, boring. And then I remember the day when we got to Virgil and the day we got to the Dido and Aeneas, and that's when a light bulb went off. And I'd forgotten this, until after writing Dido. But I imagined these scenes, but the language itself of Latin, because I didn't study Greek, but even though my grammar was appalling, I was fixated on the look and feel of these words and the images they, conjured up, the poetry. So that, I think that was an important source for me. And I think it's very important that, Wesley has the same, he studied more deeply than I, but it's incredible how these important inspirations are there they're planted early, in my case, in childhood.
Yeah. My father's a classicist and he directed the Greek play at Bradfield College every 3 years for a number of years. And so the idea of even classical performance in Greek wasn't unfamiliar to me at a very young age. Plus, Dido and Aeneas has a particular resonance for me because it was one of the things. My mother was a singer. She died a couple of years ago, and she used to sing that and was in it herself. It's probably one of the earliest pieces of classical music that I was into. It still resonates very deeply with me emotionally, and I think deeply with everybody. I mean, it's just one of those stories. The rumor rushing round town in book 4 of the Aeneid, I think, is such a classic O-level Latin text, which I certainly studied. So, I mean, the whole thing's just been with me the whole time. More generally, I think that these are fantastic. I think there are adaptations of classical works, and I think at the moment there seem to be a lot because they deal with such very recognizable and almost brutally stripped down themes that are themes that are all completely resonant in contemporary society. I mean, there's all kinds of, we have written essentially, Errollyn and I have written I mean, a love story, a sequel to a tragic love story. But I mean, in that, there are all kinds of resonances of Dido's foreignness and, you know, the founding of a new kingdom. I mean, there's new kingdoms being founded everywhere, and it's not nice, you know. And so I just don't think you can ever go wrong if you honor the major theme, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated because the year in which Dido's Ghost premiered, we saw a number of contemporary operas that engaged with classical antiquity. So I'm thinking particularly over here in America, John Corigliano and Mark Adamo premiered The Lord of Cries at Santa Fe Opera, which kind of blended Euripides' Bacchae with Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Wayne Shorter and Esperanza Spalding recently at the Kennedy Center reimagined Iphigenia. And I find it so interesting that in this particular moment in time that there was this a series of new opera interventions into Greco-Roman material. I want us to turn to going back to this idea of themes that Wes brought up. The themes that seem so really apparent to me and so in the opera and so really apparent in epic are those of retelling and remembering. So epic, as many of us here have explored, has the process of retelling and remembering built into its very poetic fabric. So I'm thinking of Achilles singing the Clea Androne, the glorious deeds of great men on the beach in Troy, and Homer, and Virgil reworking the Iliad and Odyssey in the Aeneid, and Ovid, who we've mentioned, with his interaction with Virgil, both in the Metamorphoses, the Heroides, and the Fasti. And more so than this, in ancient epic poetry, there are also some notable moments when characters come into contact with depictions of their own lived pasts. For instance, in the Odyssey, Book 8, Odysseus weeps when he hears the bard Demodocus singing the actions that he himself has participated in Troy. And also similarly in Aeneid Book 1, Aeneas sees himself depicted in fight against the Greeks on the elaborately illustrated walls of Dido's temple at Carthage. So I wonder if we could now start thinking about the theme of retelling. In particular, how is the retelling of this story, Dido and Aeneas, focalized through its specific narrators? And how did you have your opera's characters retell, or more precisely, re-perform Purcell's opera? So maybe if we could start with Wes on this and then go to Errollyn.
Oh, I was hoping we'd be starting with Errollyn on this. Well, I just want to say that there's a rather, I think the moment of Aeneas's death at the end, we are allowed I mean, some might say that sticking Purcell in a modern opera, as it were, is in itself a kind of postmodern thing. I don't think of it in that way on any level, but it's modern and it's ancient. But right at the end, Belinda, who represents the spirit of theatre, she's more of a free-floating character, says to Aeneas as he's dying, "How strange to see yourself portrayed upon a stage, as once you saw yourself and your great deeds in Carthage on a tapestry." So in fact, your question is absolutely head-on dealt with, to me, in the emotional climax of the piece. But what was the question?
No, that's well said, about remembering and actually, Dido's Lament, which I've been obsessed with for ages, you know, since have I heard those words, remember me, I mean, that is in fact, musically, that's literally is threaded through the whole opera. But also, first of all, music, I wasn't sure how to treat those moments where characters recount, you know, their past, as we saw in the opening section where Anna tells 3 or 4 verses about how she got to be where she is, got to be in the... And I don't usually do that in my operas. I always like to have quite a lot of action. But in this case, it is following the tradition, isn't it? The antiquity tradition.
And, the Remember Me aria, which is referred to musically. So Errollyn is, embedding the old music in the new music. So that's a kind of return. But, also Remember Me, that aria, it's a very hard aria to forget because it has woven its way through culture for many, many years now. Mark Morris did a famous dance of Dido and Aeneas, and he says that his original inspiration was hearing Klaus Nomi's version of Remember Me, the new wave singer, and Annie Lennox recently recorded it as well, I noted. So, it's like that aria, Remember Me, is such an epic and epochal piece of music. And so while we weren't trying to subvert the Purcell in any way, yet it was very important to us. We realized that at the end of this opera, Aeneas would be singing it, not Dido. We would have, I think this is true, Errollyn, looking back, I think we had a sense that if we couldn't make that work as the emotional climax, we'd have failed a little. Yes. Like we had to make that be the climax, because although it's certainly, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but although it's certainly sympathetic to Dido, obviously she's the title character, it's her opera, yet in fact it is Aeneas who has the emotional climax. And Errollyn, go ahead.
And in fact, Dido will have already sung that. She would have sung her Remember just before dying Carthage. And I remember when that moment arose and we said, yes, Aeneas has to sing it. I wasn't 100% convinced, but anyway, I remember composing it and trying out Matthew's voice, but it was only in the dress rehearsal when that moment comes. I burst into tears because suddenly the whole story is heading to that point where it is Aeneas coming to terms, with what he's lost. And
taking on, like Ulysses in that poem, one more mission. And it's the mission that, because of Dido's curse, which we haven't mentioned yet, Dido's curse is very important. And Dido's curse, unless that is lifted, he cannot fulfill his destiny. His people cannot fulfill their destiny. And so the curse must be lifted. And he is spurred into action, existential action, and the psychological ramifications of being faced with Dido again, as he was faced with her in the trip to
underworld,
the underworld, when she turned away, and he has to deal with why she turned away from him and wouldn't speak. So that is directly addressed as well in the libretto, in the opera.
It's safe to say that in a way I feel as if we tied up some really crucial loose ends, not least that Aeneas has so little to sing in, and he's a bit of a cardboard cutout in the Purcell, but these intriguing moments there where he's about, seeing Dido's distress that he's going to be leaving. He says, no, I'll stay. But we finish off that in our opera, that anguish, that's what I like.
Well, and also it sounds like we've got it all worked out. We're talking about this very clearly, and as though we went in knowing exactly, I was like, right, I'm going to write 475 words and they're going to, I'll put them. We did not start like that at all. This was all a very gradual process of me trying to find a rhythm for some poems that I would send Errollyn. She'd go, oh, I like that. Can we, shall I keep going? And then a little bit of music appearing, an old thing you'd written, and me listening, and really feeling our way very gingerly into it. And then because of COVID, and this is all where the story of COVID gets quite interesting, the actual opera was written amazingly quickly because the commission, if that's the right word for it, or the Barbican saying they put it on. You rang me up in October, the 31st, I remember, and you said, it's a go. We got to write it now. And it was on the following May or June.
Yeah, it was on in June, which is hysterical.
Insane.
But it trained me up for the next two, where I wrote two in 7 months. In fact, I've written 2 others within
showing
this
off.
last. No, I'm not showing off. What I mean, I'm not meaning to show. What I meant is that to have a green light to something to go forward certainly exercises the mind. So with drama,
Yes.
it's one of those things you can go round and round. You could finish this scenario, that scenario, and opera is one of those forms that you can tell stories so many different ways, and they all will be meaningful. But it's as if knowing that it was actually going to go on stage forced us to make some decisions, which we weren't 100% sure how well they would work. But I can say that they absolutely worked. But to me, what's more important, they worked in that they showed us the Purcell in a new light as well. It wasn't that, I came in and waded into Purcell, but it's that the story was amplified so that emotionally, to me, in fact, it's Aeneas that's the heart. It's a man's story. A man's inability to communicate is a key theme of this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What strikes me as so wonderful about this piece is that the way that you moved away from that initial Purcell being performed as one half interval and then a Wallen as a kind of diptych, and instead we have the Purcell as a mask within the opera. But what you do, it's not as simple as that. The characters, the Purcell is demarked spatially with a little stage and setting in some period costume. But the two worlds seemingly seem separate at the beginning and then really blur. And this sort of, both stories are moving on at different paces and meet. And this is where we get this wonderful thing. In the Purcell, we're just about to launch into Dido's lament, and we stop. And then we get to this moment where we come out of the mask and into what I guess is our present day time and space, and maybe we can get to where we're set in location and time, but we get to this moment where Aeneas steps out of the opera and encounters Dido's ghost. Isabel Peters here singing, and the two worlds merge in this such a beautiful way. And I wonder if we might show our second excerpt here, which is Aeneas Matthew Brooks stepping out of the stage and into this wonderful meeting with his past and a musical presence. So again, I'm going to share. Hopefully the sound will be all good. Let's see, right, share.
you speak to me in the
I said, and I was cold, but I would join you, and here I am.
Wonderful.
Wow.
I want to still linger. It's so powerful.
Before you ask a question, I will say that that is my favorite moment of the whole opera. And what the kind of point that I was trying to make there, which was pretty clear, is that men might fantasize about being the center of attention, but women are up to other things entirely. That, and that's a lesson it took me a long time to learn in life, if you know what I mean. I don't mean to be silly. I mean that quite seriously. And that is Aeneas's fault. He thinks she's there to haunt him, and she's not. She has other fish to fry entirely. And that line, I was summoned by the moon to save my sister, I do not know where that came from in my soul, but it hit so precisely the tone that was epic, but softly so, gently so, femininely so in a funny way, a female rhyme kind of thing rather than and I get quite moved watching that bit, Errollyn, because when she's summoned by the moon, it seems just right.
It's beautiful, beautiful words. And I remember the time when, I remember we were thinking, how, is Dido going to be revengeful? She's going to be this angry. But as you say, she's got to save her sister now. That's her purpose.
Yeah, she's only haunting him in as much as she's there and needs his assistance.
Yeah.
It's not about him.
No.
Lovely. So again, that little clip ended with the remember this, the remember me, remember something. And I wanted to just ask you both, and we can either address this very generally or very particularly. It's so powerful how the characters in Lavinium here recognize and re-experience events and people from their past lives. What do you think the importance of revisiting the past is, both for the characters on stage and also for us hearing and seeing the work in the auditorium or watching it on our computer screens, as some of us did on at the premiere last year?
I'll go first because I don't almost know how to answer, but I was at every performance, and it's each I just think it's as Wesley was saying, we're drawn to this story because it's so elemental in its themes. You know,
Elemental.
regret, nostalgia, the knowledge of one's own death and the death of loved ones, and it's. I don't know. I think that the team were quite brave. I mean, we didn't duck out of certain things, and I felt that we dealt with things in an honest way emotionally. But every time I see my I learn more about the words and about just incredible folding in of things. But it's as if the characters, the whole thing is endlessly questioning. You know, going back, you know, the past obsessively. But I wish I could find a way. But that's the language of the whole piece. Is this sort of interrogation almost of the soul, of our souls as human beings.
Yeah, I don't really know what to add. I mean, in this, what was amazing is that seeing that this video, which is the only kind of permanent evidence of it, and ironically was the premiere, you know, right in the heart of COVID time when a bass player had a positive test right before, you know, like all the nightmares happening. And that production with the fishnet, you know, in front of the orchestra, that is technically a semi-staged production, but in a way I don't want to see it anyway, because I love the drama of the band with those ancient instruments, those, you know, early music instruments that are so, you know, foreign to the contemporary eye, really, and the way the singers in the chorus are standing up and addressing, it's like you want to see everybody, and the way he demarks the stage so that you know, those people over there are in the opera and everybody else isn't. I really loved the staging. I think Frederick Wake Walker did an incredible job at, you know, what I think was a very difficult time. And that the Barbican commissioned this, of course, they needed stuff, and they needed stuff quickly. And this hit a lot of very resonant themes at that moment. And thus, having gone from the bottom of a pile of possible submissions or whatever, opera suggestions, it was suddenly on the top, and then we had to go for it quick. And I just think that's a tribute to everybody involved. That's not really about the opera itself so much as the practicalities and difficulties of working in that environment. And it is a remarkable visual document. Almost perfection. There are no wobbly cameras in it. I mean, there's no editing. That's just it. What you know, it was what we saw at the time. I saw it in Philadelphia. It was quite mind-blowing, really.
And yeah, it definitely was. Sorry. And what, you know, it did reaffirm my every so often I'll say, right, I'll never write an opera again, because it's so, honestly, it's such a hard thing to get on. It's so hard to get opera right. There's just so many variables all the time, you know, not least, you know, getting the right cast, getting the voices, just getting so many things can go wrong, and it's a true collaboration, you know, the design, all of that's part of it. But what I just think for the story we were telling, opera is that it just was the best way of doing it.
And also, you know, what we haven't quite mentioned that I keep thinking we should is the fact that what happens is, you know, they say the memories around the dining table at the welcome meal are getting unpleasant, and, you know, and unpleasantly emotional of Dido, you know, being remembered by her sister talking about her death, and it all and so they, you know, put on an opera to get things back on track, you know. Well, and at that point you've got to ask, well, why are you going to do Dido and Aeneas? That's just going to roil things up again. But what happens is those, and of course, this is the psychologically most gripping part, is those characters like Aeneas suddenly is like, they're like, why don't you come and play Aeneas, says, you know, the spirit of theatre to him. And he goes, yes, I fancy some amateur theatricals. I've always thought I had a bit of a voice. I'll play me, you know. And then who's going to play Dido? Well, it's going to be Anna. They are going to be living this out, you know. So that is, I think, and then, you know, the evil sorcerer, well, you know, we know who that is too. It's the vengeful wife. And, you know, well, it didn't. But anyway, so that's when it became really interesting, was thinking of those doubling parts, like every time doubling is involved, what does it mean?
Absolutely, and that beautiful moment at the end in the apotheosis as Anna and Belinda, the Anna from the sort of shadows, almost a shadow Anna from Purcell, merge together. And did you know that? And the doubling of the voices suddenly takes it into this supernatural layer.
And do you know something? That is Freddie Wakewalker right there, because Dido and Anna needed to merge, and so Freddie, we were all vexed with how we can achieve this theatrically, and Freddie sent me a text. He said, "There's no way around it. We have to hear the voices merging. We have to hear them. We have to hear two voices." And so then we see Belinda, and then it opens up yet another resonance and another connection to be made. But that was it. He made it work in opera, and that's testament to his.
And that is, I think, straight from the Ovid. Then not the merging necessarily, but them becoming sprites to the river, in them becoming and so it was important that we did that, and that was the climax. And I always think that music always reminds me a little of the Pearl Fishers, I must say, because it's so floaty and beautiful sounding, and and that is Aeneas representing the success of his mission forever, and the curse lifted, but that's all his body and mind can stand at that point. And I mean, as Errollyn, I wrote a very, very serviceable epilogue where at Aeneas's funeral, but unfortunately the composer could see no way to including that. It's a very great sadness. Just 2 pages of the most beautiful. I could do a dramatic reading for you now if you like. You'll see how wrong she was.
Oh, but that's the other thing. How do you end up?
Always impeccable timing.
Yes.
No, she was right. She was totally right.
Yeah, absolutely. So just thank you. We're kind of coming to the end of our time together this evening. I just want to thank you both so much for sharing the work and your working process with us. And I for one, am really dying to know where to now. We've been lingering in the past. Let's turn to the future. What are the plans for Dido's Ghost going onwards?
Oh, well, it will definitely go to San Francisco, you'll be happy to hear, next November, December, with, I think, most of the same cast, but this is Philharmonia Baroque Chorale, and one of the co-commissioners, and you might even have a short tour with them. The other thing is that the original performers, Dunedin Consort, they've got plans afoot to take it abroad. What I would love, what we all would love, is a really fantastic recording or video made of it, because I think it does need. We need something a permanent record of it, but and also just the other week, Princeton University just performed tiny little excerpts of it with their students. So, the words got out about this piece. It's very. The other thing I was going to say, Wesley mentioned this before, that it runs at a little under 90 minutes, and it's a perfect, a perfect COVID length. But also, Wes and I would like, we're simmering what it is we can work on together. Honestly, this is, we'll come up with something.
Well, what it is that this was presented, from you to me, and then from me to you, and the confluence and the coincidence of my having been doing some work on this, and then it suddenly came up, and me knowing so many things, and you just have to wait for that thing to happen again. It'll happen, but you can't force that thing. And I look forward to it.
Yeah, we do. And the other thing to say, of course, was Wesley is the most prolific and renowned singer-songwriter. So that, I've worked with a lot of librettists, and some are definitely more musical than others. And it's really hard if they're not musical, because they don't. So all the sounds of the words in this opera were a joy for me to set, and at the same time the sentences are packed with information, related to historical, so that it's beautifully what's the word rich.
Thank you.
Beautifully rich. That seems to me like the perfect place to end it this evening. Wesley Stace and Errollyn Wallen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Lovely questions. Thank you, Tom.